Okay, I think I got it. Okay, so I do want to introduce Jana. She is a sixth grade math and science teacher in the Olympia School District. She works at Jefferson Middle School and has a ton of experience doing all kinds of things, math and sciencey things, both with educators around the state, with students, great work in Olympia School District. She facilitates in the Math Education Collaborative. She facilitates lots of workshops and professional development work. And she was a 2016 finalist for the Presidential Award for Mathematics for Excellence in Math and Science Teachings, which is a pretty big honor to be a finalist in that category. Last summer, as I mentioned, she attended the 13th International Congress of Math Educators, and we are super excited for her to bring some of that learning and sharing to all of you with all of us. So I'm going to toss it over to you, Jana, and if you have, if you'd like to make any more introductory remarks about yourself, that would be great, and then we'll move through the webinar. And you can let me know when you need me to fast forward through these slides.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much. When Nasaway and I were getting ready for this webinar, hello everyone. It's really great to know that you're there, even though I can't see you. As Nasaway and I were getting ready for this webinar, we talked about how best to structure it. And really, having gone to the conference, I have stories I can tell. And so a lot of what I have to share with you is really informal, and it's from one teacher to another. But there were things that I encountered there that shed so much light on what we know as educators here in the United States, and those are the sorts of things I want to share with you. So we decided to have Nasaway interview me, and so we put together a series of questions, and hopefully we'll be answering your questions and along the way, and if we're not, I am really grateful to Nasaway to be monitoring the chat so that we can take the questions at the end. So.
All right.
Nasaway?
Yes, I get to play Oprah for a little bit. I like that. So Jana, tell us a little bit about how you found out about this opportunity, and what did it take for you to be able to go and do this, have this experience?
So this slide that you're looking at right now is the logo for the International Congress of Mathematics Educators, which I'd never heard of before in my life, until I got an email from NCTM, and Nasaway, that would be the next slide. The NCTM is the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics, and I had heard of that, and I got just a little email that said travel grant opportunities available with a series of 4 questions that just asked about my commitment as a math educator, any sorts of leadership things that I had been engaged in. And at that point, I was so excited, and I'm still so excited about my work with the Math Education Collaborative, that apparently I had good things to say, and they accepted my application. So the Congress was when I began to research what the Congress was all about, it looked quite Greek to me. Even though the website is in English, it was a really, really academically oriented conference, and I can talk a little bit more about that. But still, the opportunity was amazing for me. So it was an email from NCTM, and,
okay.
and a Saturday morning answering a series of 4 questions.
Okay. I do want to hear, I think we all want to hear a little more about the conference, but I would love to hear about Germany and the city that you went to, and whoever took these phenomenal pictures, which is probably your husband. I'm not sure. They're just beautiful.
Yeah, well, thank you. So Hamburg is a city in northern Germany, and there are about 15 photos, so you can just go ahead and click through them as I describe the city. That one happens to be my daughter. It's an industrial port city, so one of our best sightseeing adventures was taking a ferry across the port from one side of the river to another. There are dogs there. It's a really, really beautiful city with parks everywhere. My daughter, who is 18, was just struck by how possible it is for people in northern Germany to spend their lives outside, and how much they socialize with each other outdoors in places that aren't full of cars. I got around by bicycle, We stayed in an Airbnb that was probably about a mile from the conference, which was at the university in Hamburg. It could have been possible to stay in a hotel on site, but it was more economical to stay in the Airbnb, and then that allowed me to ride my bicycle everywhere. Bicycles have the right of way, mostly, even over cars and pedestrians, and so as somebody who loves to ride my bike, I really liked that. That Hamburg is proud of what they call their Hanseatic heritage, and this is a part of European history I hadn't known very much about before. The Hanseatic League was a trading league in Northern Europe, a really early version of the European Union, is how I came to understand it, having only been there for about a year. But it was about people working together to get the things they wanted and needed across international boundaries. That's the Hertz Tower in that picture, which is a giant radio tower. It's just a really, really beautiful city that I didn't see as much of as my husband and my daughter did, because I was at the conference, which was indoors, but we did have a couple of great sightseeing afternoons. That's from the ferry boat on the river, the estuary that leads out into the sea. It's a far northern city. It's really close to Scandinavia. It's really beautiful, really beautiful. There's graffiti, statues. It's the architecture of the city isn't really old because it was bombed pretty extensively during World War II. It was rebuilt after World War II. But there are some older buildings there. And I did get to go on one adventure to the countryside. That'll be coming in a couple of slides. The conference sponsored a day-long outing, and we went to, I think it's the next slide, we went to the estate of an artist named Broussard, who was a student of Rudolf Steiner in the 20s in northern Germany, and created this estate that sought to unite mathematics and nature. Oh, here, that's not his estate. That's Lübeck, which is that photograph. And that's my daughter and my husband. More Hamburg.
So as we go into the next slides, tell us what most surprised you about attending this conference, and maybe you can talk a little bit more about what you referenced earlier around it being kind of an academic setting, or the application itself was kind of academic in nature.
So what I was expecting was to be surrounded by the best math teachers in the world, and I very well might have been, but primarily the participants in the conference were higher ed people. So they have a whole different set of concerns than people who teach children in public schools. And so the focus of the conference was really about the study of the teaching of mathematics as opposed to the teaching of mathematics. So it wasn't nearly as practical as I was hoping it would be. I'm a really practical person, but I did find my way in to begin to figure out how to really have a meaningful experience. I wanted to do a lot of math. I love doing math, and I've learned both in my work with Heather Dorsey. Hi, Heather, thank you for really getting me started, and my work with other teachers, even before even before I met Heather, but she was a huge influence to me. That the best learning for teachers is to actually do the math themselves, and I'm really committed to that, especially since working with the Math Education Collaborative. So we had lectures that were about the teaching of mathematics and that were about exploring how to teach mathematics better, while I know that learning through lecturing really is not the best way to learn anything. So there was always some tension in that for me. And at the same time, it was just fascinating. So in this slide, this fellow is talking about how important it is that we have an understanding of what ideas our students bring to what mathematics is. And he's written a book in German. His lecture was in English, or it was translated, I don't remember which. But and he's talking about the different perception of mathematics decade by decade by decade, looking at popular German books for children. So the ideas were important, and yet they weren't as practical in many instances as I'd have liked them to be. And it was also really overwhelming because I have a book this thick of, of choices that I could have made. And I was supposed to select one strand and then join colleagues in that strand. My favorite part of the conference were the poster sessions, which were 2 evenings. And this woman, she's from Finland, and I was attracted to her poster because of the little guy doing the backflip on a skateboard behind her. That's her son, and her work is in really figuring out how to engage rural youth in Finland in mathematics, and that really resonated for me because teaching in Western Washington, I work with rural and suburban youth, but really our job is to engage kids who may or may not be college bound in thinking mathematically. And so she and I had a great conversation about that. She said, "What's going on at this conference? They think everyone's going to college or everyone's already in college. What happens before that?" So we connected well in that regard.
So roughly how many people at this conference?
Thousands, like
Thousands, okay.
people. Yeah.
And would you say, did you meet other K-12 teachers?
I did, and every time we met each other, we just would talk nonstop about what we were learning and the ideas that we were encountering and exchanging.
Right.
If I were to go again, I would figure out some way to play a leadership role in bringing K-12 teachers together, because that would have made my experience better. And I'm sure that was one of the things we talked about, is that we needed a meeting place or some kind of hub where we could come together and exchange our ideas, because we have different perspectives and needs. And I might have been courageous enough to make a poster or present, but before I went, I didn't even know what a poster was. Now I know. There's one in the background there. I could have done a poster about something, but that's kind of a higher ed thing, I guess.
Yeah, I think the poster session is very higher ed.
Yeah, I think it, but look, I can make a poster. We can make posters. Like, we could have a teacher poster session. So yeah, but I don't have that background or that experience. This guy was really fun to talk to. He was, I don't remember where he was from. I think maybe Germany, but he was using technology to test something that we as teachers know is really important, and that's that we need our students to spend enough time reading a task to really understand it. And so he had developed this eye recognition, or was employed this eye recognition software to see how quickly somebody had read the task. And it was one of those problems where the one I know is about the age of the shepherd. There are 5 dogs and 25 shepherds. How old is the shepherd? And when people read it too quickly, they figure the shepherd's 30, because they just take 5 and 25 and add them together without even thinking about what the mathematics means. He chose a German problem that's similar to that, with the age of the captain, and learned that adults don't do any better than children in general at reading carefully enough. They just see the numbers and assume they have to add them. So it was fun to talk to him about his research.
So tell us a little bit more about what you found out about math education in other parts of the world as you talked with different educators from all over.
So we're interested, right? Because in math in other parts of the world, because we're constantly hearing about how we're not doing very well. After I got back, I did a little bit of research, which is represented on this slide. And some of the data that we hear that's about how we're not doing very well comes from the TIMSS test. Many of you probably heard of it, which stands for Trends in International Mathematics and Science Study. I've never seen it given in my context, and I don't know enough about it to know how and what sites they choose for giving it, but it's given every 4 years in about 50 countries, and it compares those countries. It turns out that the US has been ranking in the top 10 to 15 for the last several rounds of those 50 countries. So when I dug a little bit deeper and started to look at this data, I mean, it's nice to win and be at the top, but it has to be taken in context, and that's something else I'm going to be sharing with you in a moment. But the top 10 to 15 doesn't sound so bad, The test is given in grades 4 and 8. Singapore is always in the top 3. The US and the Netherlands are in the top 15, and South Africa is in the bottom 3. And so, one of the things that was most exciting for me about the conference was I decided to join I'm going to back up a little bit. I decided to join the discrete math strand because I was hoping that we would do some math. And discrete math is the math of webs and networks and sort of outcomes. And unfortunately, the discrete math people didn't do a whole lot of math. But if you could go to the next slide, I met this man. You'll see in just a second as soon as Nasue. Yeah, okay, the one on the left. He was talking about he was a high school teacher, so I was really happy I'd found one of my public school teaching people. He was also working on getting his doctorate and working with the teacher education college in his small town. And the way that he was talking about what was happening in his classroom, I could tell that there was something special happening. And what I could tell was happening was in the way that he was talking about his students. I knew that they were getting a chance to revisit problems, and he was actually interested in what happens when a student doesn't have to just do a problem and get the answer right, but has an opportunity to revisit that problem over and over and over again. And I met him on about day 3 of the conference, and by this time I was kind of tired of a lot of the dialogue had been about from the higher math people, the professors, is gosh darn it, why aren't the kids learning math? What's wrong with them? And that's not a very useful starting place for me, because I believe everybody can do mathematics. And I'll quote Ruth Parker from the Math Education Collaborative: everyone is capable of having mathematical ideas, and I completely believe that. And so I could tell this man had that perspective, but I didn't know where he was from. He was presenting in Germany in English. So I went up to him and asked him, and he said, I said, I really liked your presentation. There's something in it that's really refreshing for me. It sounds like your students have as much time as they need to think through math problems. And he looked at me and said, oh yes, of course they do. That's how we do it in the Netherlands. So then there was a little bit of a gap in my program. So I looked at it and realized, oh, right now on the other side of the campus, the Netherlands, as a community of educators, was doing a presentation on mathematics in their country. So I got on my little bicycle and I went there as fast as I could. And this was probably the highlight of the whole conference for me, to learn that there's a whole school of mathematics in the Netherlands that I was introduced to when I worked for a year at ESD 113, working with Heather Dorsey through the work of Fosnot and Math in the City. And they call it realistic mathematics education. And these are some of the most awesome and best resources. And I've learned more about teaching math and been more successful with these resources than anything else I've ever encountered. So if you can go to the next slide. It was developed in the 60s and 70s. The main thinker's Freudenthal. And I'll let you read this quote from Freudenthal, which actually comes from the Freudenthal Institute of the US, which is in Boulder, Colorado. But I'll let you read it. So as published in the US, the resources that come out of this school of thought are called Young Mathematicians at Work. They have that subtitle. And the whole idea is that we can engage students in learning math if we position them as capable and competent mathematicians. And one of the first books I read from this series, and I think introduced to me by Heather Dorsey, is this one. I'm holding it up for you. I hope you can see it on your screens. The primary author of the whole series is Catherine Fosnot, and she writes in a chapter of this book about how so often the mathematics we teach in school, and I know the mathematics I learned that when I was in school, were really about the history of mathematics. When I was in school, I was never actually doing math, never actually having mathematical ideas. I was learning mathematical ideas that others had already developed. And so if you could go to the next slide.
What's that book again? The title?
It's called Young Mathematicians at Work, and there's
Okay.
a link that will also provide some resources and some titles.
Okay.
So I went to that session from the Netherlands, and then and it might have been a little bit the day before or the day after. I also met this man who was studying in Germany, and he was really interested in the history of math pedagogy, so the history of how we were taught math, and his poster was about a German philosopher who was arguing that unfortunately math could be taught didactically because of its structure, and in the 1920s was lamenting that that math pedagogy had gone in that direction, kind of in a monkey see monkey do kind of way. I'll do problems on the board, you do problems the way I do them, and then you'll be learning math, which is very much about teaching the history of mathematics and not positioning students as competent mathematicians. And so I just loved meeting him and seeing that he had encountered this philosopher from the 1920s who was also quite worried about a problem that was developing in that point. So on the next slide, you'll see an idea that I learned from the Math Education Collaborative. And so there are two quotes on this slide. And the first one is from the Freudenthal Institute, this Dutch school of math educators. And it's really about children being able to make sense of things. And then the second quote is from the Math Education Collaborative, Patty Loughran and Ruth Parker's so closely, and who helped me completely transform the way I teach math. And so I'll let you read one moment. And so what I think is really the most important idea that ties these two groups together, I guess through me, because I'd encountered materials from Freudenthal before I met the Math Education Collaborative, but then in working with Ruth and Patty of MEC, I'll just call them MEC, I didn't really know how to make it happen. And the thing that's most important really is the idea of student agency, that students are in charge of their sense making. I am in no way the holder of answers, the giver of answers, the giver of sense, that the students really have to create that for themselves, and that they have power and choices in how they approach and solve problems, which does not mean that it's a free-for-all. It doesn't mean they're running around and just discovering things. Both MEC and the materials from Fosnot have helped me learn how to really structure their experiences so that they're learning the things that I know that they need to learn in order to make sense of their world using mathematics. So on the next slide.
Do you think that is a commonly shared American mathematics notion? This is coming from a person, by the way, everybody online. I am not a math person. So I'm trying to make it sound like I am, but I'm not. But I'm just curious about the whole idea around student agency in mathematics, learning and understanding. Is that a commonly shared theory?
I know lots of people who are working hard to enact this in their classrooms. I don't know that it dominates math pedagogy in the United States, but it is very, very much a part of the Common Core standards for mathematical practice. So if if we're teaching in a way that honors those standards for math practice, then this has to be present in the classroom.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I wish that every child had a chance to have mathematical agency in their classrooms. So this was a like make it this that so the Dutch um, approach to teaching math um, is really about using stories and contexts that children can make sense of for themselves. They're familiar enough, and they're things that are real to them. So an example of that from my classroom today is we're working with base 10, and we're there. I have sixth graders, so something they need to be able to learn how to do is long division using a standard algorithm. If I were to just teach the algorithm, it would soon become nonsense in their mind. And so they worked hard for about an hour or 45 minutes on a problem that was about sharing donuts that had been delivered in the school, and pallets of 1,000 and cartons of 100 and boxes of 10, and really figuring out how they could distribute those donuts effectively and efficiently, rather than just grabbing their calculator or doing a long division algorithm and and delivering 1,700 donuts one by one to each classroom. So they had to really think about how they were going to move pallets and cartons and boxes around. So that's one example of something that's real. But another piece of the whole school of thought is also honoring that what happens in a person's imagination or in their mind can be just as real. And my work with MEC has helped me figure out how to provide students with genuine problems that they can bring to life in their minds and get excited about. And I think an example of that from today in my classroom and yesterday is a problem that they've been working on that has to do with trying to figure out why it is that some decimals repeat and some do not. And it's something that they can actually imagine. And it's been really fun to we have a little bit of an epidemic of like repeating little rhythms going around the room that can be really annoying. You know, like they'll punch into the calculator 1 divided by 9, and what they see on the calculator is 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1, and then they start vibrating, and they're saying 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1, but they really are. It's really real to them that point one repeating is a thing that happens, and then they take it further to try and figure out why it happens. I'm not sure if I'm making sense, but I hope I am. And I've given you the slide and haven't given you a chance to read it yet. So now I'm going to do that. So the next slide offers principles of RME, or realistic math education. And I'll trust you, Nasue, if other people are asking questions, then I should go in a different direction. I'm happy to do that too.
So far so good, but if anybody has a question, please start posting. Just a reminder, there might be a Q&A button on your menu, and you're welcome to go there, or you may see a chat option. Either one of those are good, and I'm monitoring both. Go ahead.
Okay, so the reason I wanted to share these principles of RME, or realistic math education, from the Netherlands is because they are so closely related both to the standards for math practice and the kind of professional development that's offered by the Math Education Collaborative. So students have to be engaged in an activity. They have to be doing something. That whatever it is they're doing needs to be connected to either an inner reality that they have within themselves or an outer reality out in the world. Math can be structured so that you can move along a progression through different levels of understanding. And at the same time, those levels are completely, they're intertwined with one another, and different areas of mathematics are intertwined with one another. That mathematical understanding happens through interaction from student to student, and the really intentional and specific guidance on the part of the teacher is key in developing children developing mathematical. And so the next slide are the Common Core Standards for Math Practice, which I absolutely love. And those of you who are teachers of mathematics, I'm sure, are familiar with these. But in order to do these things, it takes an approach that, in my opinion, embodies what is happening in the Netherlands, and an approach that really gives students agency over their own mathematical thinking.
So Jana, you talked about this a little bit earlier with the TIMS study, but we do hear frequently about how the U.S. doesn't do as well comparatively to other countries in mathematics. Right. And what are the kinds of things you learned about that?
So it was on almost the last day of the conference, or the second to the last day. Each day I went to the keynote presentation because I found those to be pretty fascinating. And this one was a researcher from Singapore, Singaporeese maybe, a researcher from Singapore, and the story she told was to this international audience: you have been coming to me in Singapore and saying, what are you doing? What are you doing in your classrooms that's creating these outcomes that you're always in the top 3, your scores are so good. And she talked about their research instruments and how she had put together a team of people, and they've done quantitative research and they've done qualitative research, and they were going into math classrooms and observing teachers and trying to figure out whether or not there was anything happening in Singapore that would point to a kind of teaching or a kind of pedagogy that was particularly effective. And every single thing they did, 4 or 5 studies over 10 or 15 years, was completely inconclusive. In Singapore, in the classrooms in Singapore, teachers are doing all sorts of things. They're doing direct instruction, they're having students work in small groups, they're integrating mathematics with other subject matter, they're doing all kinds of things, and there was no pattern at all. So they went back to the drawing board and decided to start asking a different kind of question. So instead of going into classrooms and watching the teachers teach, they decided to ask students, what is it that makes a great math teacher? And finally, their data was conclusive. What students in Singapore said makes a great math teacher is a teacher who teaches me how to do the problems on the test. So the students respond, they know they're getting what they need when they're learning how to do the problems on the test, which is interesting. And I would never try not to teach students to do the problems on the test, but I know that we ask our students in US schools what really matters to them in their teacher, they say things like, my teacher cares about me, my teacher knows me. And it's a really different cultural orientation. We're not oriented in schools to be focused on outcomes and tests. And so that just put into perspective for me how cultural context really, 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 really does matter in terms of the international test scores. And given that, I'll take the top 5 to 10. I think that's great, because that's really not what our culture of our students is demanding. And parents too in the U.S. want their kids' teachers to know them and care about them. And it doesn't mean the academics isn't important, but that was an interesting lesson.
So these resources on the screen are ones that are these your go-to resources?
Yeah, they're my favorite books. and a lot of them, let's see, the first two, the Young Mathematicians at Work series, which I'll hold up again. I have two of the volumes. I think there are three or four of these. The first time I read them, they just blew my mind in terms of the learning I was able to do about what it means to be a mathematician just by sitting on my couch and reading. The Math in the City, Math in Context are the practical resources that come from the work of Klasnacht. So they're the practical resources that go along with these. And I have a couple books. This one's kind of funny. It has, this is mini lessons for operations with fractions, decimals, and percents. And this is how I first started to have students really take over ownership of their own mathematical thinking. And you can see it has a business card on it that's not mine. Heather has mine. I have Heather's, so this is a copy, but she's got mine. I hope, Heather, and if you don't, I'll send it back to you. And then this is just the one reason I have these is the Olympia School District, when I first started working there, had adopted these resources for fifth and sixth grade. And from these, I learned so much about how to really guide students through a mathematical landscape, and they even call that intertwining and leveled set of mathematical ideas a landscape. And I'll show you real quick picture of what the graphic of what that looks like. It'll look really on your screen. It'll look crazy. But the idea of the landscape is that it's not linear. You don't just start in one place and go to another, everybody marching along in lockstep, but you have to revisit ideas and continue to build understanding. Van de Waals just an awesome book for developing my own mathematical understanding and understanding how students do it. When I talked to U.S. educators I encountered in Hamburg, one thing we talked about was why in the world wasn't there anything at the conference about mindsets and people's belief as learners, and Joe Bowler. So this is a really key book by Joe Bowler called Mathematical Mindsets. It's a fairly recent one. And then my very favorite book of all, I left it at school, I don't have it at home, is a book by Marilyn Burns called Teaching Elementary Mathematics. And it's been around for a really long time. And it's just full of problem solving. It's just awesome. So, and then I also have Ruth Parker's Math Power book with me, which it's not on the list, on the book list, but she's one of the people on the people side of that slide. So, and then the Discovering Art of Mathematics, I met Christine von Rennes at the conference, and that was the one session that I went to when we did a lot of math, and that was a really fun one. And she's on the East Coast, but if you can Google her name and find her right away. She has a National Science Foundation grant to develop resources that do interdisciplinary inquiry-based math for college students, which is really pretty exciting to see that that's happening. So maybe this
slide was out of order, but talking about Singapore.
And that's the woman in the red is the researcher who was presenting all of this research that was inconclusive.
So you mentioned South Africa as a place that has some things in common right. with the U.S. What can you share with us about what you learned about their math education world?
So South Africa struggles if you look at international test scores. And I went to more than one, probably 3 or 4 presentations where there were people either in the audience or presenting from a South African perspective. And they're coming from only about 20 years since having abolished apartheid and having established that everyone has the right to a free and basic education. And when they say everyone, they really mean everyone. And the people at the conference were really passionate about how committed they are to that everyone means everyone. And those of us in Washington State are watching our state grapple with the meaning of everyone, meaning everyone has the right to a free and high quality education. And it just really struck me in hearing their stories what a high charge we've given ourselves, and really how beautiful it is to really believe and stand by a commitment to everyone getting to have a high quality education. And that's certainly what I stand for as an educator. And they over and over and over again were really articulate about how education really is a political act, and strongly encouraging everyone at the conference to see education as being political. And so it was just really inspiring to hear them talk about their struggle to have teachers, to have schools, to create the conditions through which children can come to schools. And it just made me realize that maybe in the US, we're maybe 100 years further along a pathway that they're just starting. And it's a really modern, amazing idea to say that everyone has the right to a high quality education, and that everyone has the power to have valuable mathematical ideas. It was just really inspiring to hear their stories. So these are resources I just put together for anyone who's interested in quickly and easily learning more through the internet. I did email the NCTM grant people, letting them know I was going to be doing this webinar, and ask them what opportunities were coming up. There are May deadlines, and if you just follow those links, there are dozens of opportunities, and the grants range in size from $1,000 to $20,000, and they are really looking for progressive, committed math educators to apply for those grants. So that's what those links are for. ICME 14, the next conference, will be in China. And I imagine there will be travel grants for that one. And then I just added the Freudenthal Institute with ties to the Netherlands, the Context for Learning website. If I got you curious about the kind of math that's being done in the Netherlands and how it's been translated for US users. And then, of course, Math Education Collaborative, who are just rockstar professional development people who have brought me so far.
Thank you for that. We've got about 15 minutes. We have not had any questions posted or anything in the chat, which makes me wonder if we're relaying to people. I'm hoping that we're still going. So if anybody has a question or a comment, or a burning issue you want to talk about, that would be great. Oh, thank you, Jennifer. She did comment. She can hear us. Great. Jana is here to talk about this stuff, so this is your opportunity if you're interested. We will also make sure that you get a link to the recording, and you're welcome to certainly share that with others, and make sure that you get this PowerPoint so that you can get direct links to the resources that she mentioned. Oops. Sorry, everyone, I'm not Xing out here. I just suddenly move things around. And get back to the resource page. So we got a question here about the school you're teaching at, and maybe you could talk a little bit about the JAMS program at Jefferson.
So I'm a really super lucky teacher right now because I work at Jefferson Middle School in the Olympia School District, and I have a really, really supportive principal. I'm lucky at Jefferson in that I have a math and science block. So I have my students for 2 hours, and I teach them both math and science. And the
roughly how many students do you see a day?
I have a total of 60.
60, okay.
So it makes me feel like I can almost maybe teach as well as some of my elementary colleagues can teach, because I can get to know the kids really well, and I can be really flexible with them. Although if I ended up in a regular middle school schedule, I would figure out what to do. But I'm glad I don't. I'm glad that I have that flexibility.
Do those students, they exit your block, do they go into a 7th and 8th grade block?
Yeah, they have a
Same,
2 hour,
okay.
a math and science block for 7th grade, and then in 8th grade they have an extended science time where they do career and technical education and business.
Okay, we've got another question. Carla asked this question. What teaching methods would you recommend for high school students who are just learning English and learning math at the same time?
Oh gosh, that's really an interesting question, which I haven't had to personally grapple with. But I would say number talks would be really valuable, um, because, well, now I'm thinking about context and needing to bring contexts to life for students through language and pictures. Um, I would love that challenge sometime to figure that out. But I'm thinking anything that that I wouldn't even begin to think about doing it without having manipulative in the room. Because as a person who I was traveling in Germany and not speaking German, there was a lot of body language going on, and like a lot of pointing to things. And so the little bit that I know about teaching English language learners, sort of in sheltered instruction protocols, that probably the questioner knows far more about than I do. But being able to point at things and talk about real things seems really important. So I wish I.
It's a really good question, Carla. Yeah, it's a good question. Okay, we have another question. At Jefferson, what are the adopted math instructional materials used in the Olympia School District middle schools?
That's a really good question. We're in transition. And so our process has been one that's worked really well for me, though. We historically have had, or at least for the last decade, have had CMP, Connected Mathematics Project, which goes a ways towards the contexts are there, but often the contexts are not real for students because they're not developed for the students who are in your classroom. And the resource is so scaffolded from step to step that it's really hard for students to really feel like they're being powerful problem solvers or they have agency. But the problems in the book aren't bad. So I can take problems from those books and teach them without really using the book. And they're also a backbone for some homework problems, but they're not aligned with Common Core very well anymore. And so yearly we meet as a group of 6th grade teachers, 7th grade teachers, and 8th grade teachers. We have a fantastic math coach right now named Cheryl Matern who works with us. And we figure out together what units we're going to use to supplement those. And we've used a little bit of Engage New York. They're all free online things. A little bit of Engage New York, more, at least in 6th grade, of Georgia, and then a little bit of the Utah program that's published online. And so that those resources provide a backbone. But then I'm also always grabbing tasks from my Fosnot books and from Van de Waal and from Marilyn Burns. And I work in a school district and in a school where my administrator just says, "Go for it, teach. Figure out how to get the kids to learn as much as you possibly can, and however you do it is up to you. I trust your professionals." So that's been really fantastic. And we're looking at materials starting next week, and I don't know what we'll find. It would be nice to have a better package that's more integrated with itself and from year to year. We just don't have that right now.
So you do that collaboration across middle schools in the district?
Yeah, we do.
Okay. What do you do during the year in your own building with the other math and science teachers?
Constant back and forth, like run down the hall. Wendy, check this out. This is a great one. We talked about the donut problem this morning, which is actually from the Georgia unit. So my 6th grade colleague and I are constantly almost daily, just dialoguing about what our kids are discovering, what what they're encountering, what's a little different now that we have Common Core standards and there's a different curriculum at the elementary school. Pesky little details like, oh my goodness, they don't know how to find the area of a triangle. We're teaching that now. Okay, we have to teach that. They used to know that, now they don't. But how cool, they know what a right triangle is, and they know what an isosceles triangle is, so they know a lot more about the geometric shapes. So teaching them how to find the area is a lot easier. So we're constantly having conversations like that. And then with my 7th grade colleague in this block-oriented program, we wish we had more time, but we're carving out time starting next week, and we're going to be looking at all of the 6th and 7th grade standards. We're planning on writing them all on index cards and spreading them all over the floor and figuring out where we can make connections between the 6th and 7th grade standards to make our students' experience more cohesive and more efficient, because there's never enough time. So those are just some examples of the kind of collaboration we have. And then I'm always talking to the social studies and language arts teachers too, and I try to align any sort of language instruction I'm doing directly with their process, so that they're practicing their writing and their reading skills in the same way in my room as they're learning in their other classes, because that just makes sense, and they're great teachers, so why wouldn't I follow their lead?
Good.
Yeah, but nothing, nothing fancy, just running down the hall and talking whenever we can, which I guess might be kind of fancy. I don't know. And we have lunch together every day.
Well, that's always good.
Yeah.
About 5 more minutes. Any other questions, comments, interests? I'm curious about Jefferson. How many would you say? How many teachers are new to the profession? Teachers. And are there any new to the profession in your content area?
Yes. Well, when you say new, are you thinking like less than 5 years?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, they're the person who teaches 7th grade above me. She might be in her 5th year. So yes, there are teachers who are new to the profession. And in the science teacher, I think, is one of the science teachers is in his 5th year as well, 4th or 5th year as well. And they're both fantastic. They're great. Then we have a brand new teacher who's teaching some elective things, and he might have taught for 6 months before he came to Jefferson, but man, he's a born teacher, if there really is such a thing. I mean, he just loves children and knows how to command the room, and is really joyful and very, very good.
Do you notice any difference of teachers coming new into the profession in the last, I don't know, 5 to 10 years versus perhaps teachers that came in new before that? And in terms of how they engage students in the content, their collegiality. Oh, there's your cat. Very cute.
Black cat. His name's Duster. He would
Hi,
like
Duster.
all of you. Well, I don't know that. I mean, I've been learning and growing so much for the past, and I haven't really stayed put. So I can't. It's hard for me to answer that question. Like, if I'd stayed put and not changed, I would be able to say more.
Okay.
But I've always loved them. And it's so fun to watch people go from, oh my goodness, I don't know how to do this, to, oh yeah, to I can't do this. I'm pretty sure I can't do this, to wow, I really can do this, and then just really enjoy teaching. And I've gotten to see colleagues at Jefferson do that. It's really fun to watch them and support them.
Mm-hmm. All right. Anyone else? Comment, question, last words? All right. I think we're going to maybe even be 3 minutes early off this webinar. That's pretty amazing. Jana, thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing with us what you learned at the conference. It was really fascinating to hear about other countries and the work that they're doing. And I think, you know, you clearly have this eagerness to hear and learn what others are doing and internalize that into the work that you're doing with students in Olympia. So I just appreciate your willingness and your interest to keep growing and learning as an educator.
Yeah, well, thank you, and thanks for hosting and making it possible for me to share.
Yes. All right, everyone. We're going to sign off. You will see a follow-up email from us with a link to the PowerPoint as well as a link to the recorded webinar. And if you would like to share that, we'd love for you to send that on to others in your building or in your district or beyond that perhaps were not able to sign on to this webinar tonight, but will be interested in this work.
That's why
yes.
One more thought. Why don't you? I didn't put my contact information anywhere in the PowerPoint.
I will add that in there if you don't mind.
Yeah, so add it.
Okay, I will add that in there. Sure.
I'd be happy to hear from people. So. Yeah.
Okay, and just a quick plug. If it seemed like there was a lot of interest from people in hearing from educators who've had cool experiences like Jana had, and so if there are any of you that have had these kinds of opportunities and want to share with others about that, or if you know of colleagues that have had these kind of opportunities, please let me know. I'll put my contact information in there too, because we would like to highlight these teacher experiences. This is good stuff to share. This is great resource building, and you know, even if you are not a mathematics person, this stuff is really cool and interesting. So I just think this is a good opportunity, and in a day and age where we can't necessarily make it face-to-face in conferences or in meetings or those kinds of things, webinars are helpful to kind of get information out, and then people can connect later. So if there are other people in your world or yourselves that have had opportunities you want to share, please get in touch, because it would be great to do kind of webinar series of teachers sharing their work. All right, good night, everyone. Thank you so much. Have a good week.
Thanks, Naswe. Good night.
Good night.